There we go. All right, recording in progress. All right, we are off and running. Um, yeah, thanks for those questions. I'm going to take the question, Dad, that you posted in the forums, and also one from Adam,
Okay.
and kind of be the meat and potatoes of the call today.
Okay.
Um, yeah, and then I was gonna just for starting with a little bit of banter, I was gonna say I made a post this week about the best thing I'd ate
Yeah.
last week, and honestly, it's a simple little recipe that Kristen found for al pastor tacos. Delicious. So, and I know you guys are coming up to see us and to see Jono's senior night football game. So we're gonna make that one of the nights you guys are here.
Very good.
Kristen just bought some more pineapple today to go with those because it's such a great combo, the al pastor and the pineapple, I think. So
Nice.
anyways, it'll be fun. It'll be fun having you guys out this weekend and
Yeah.
going seeing some football and whatnot. So
When are Lowell and Garnet coming? Do you know?
Thursday, tomorrow. They'll be here around noon tomorrow.
Noon. Yeah. Yeah. We were going to leave in the morning tomorrow.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we'll
Good.
be up there too.
That's going to be fun. They're flying. They're flying into
Sky
Allegiant
Harbor.
has flights from to the Gateway Airport. It's like it's about 10 minutes.
William.
Yeah, that they fly out of Provo, so they're just taking a flight from Provo up in Utah down to here. So it's a really quick flight. They're really cheap. It's a great deal. So there we go. I'm already in our Bitcoin community. I'm plugging Allegiant Airlines. Maybe they'll be a future advertiser or something. That's okay. I really. Yeah, but see, I kind of want to do that. I want to have some banter. I want to talk about things. I want to be. I really do want to build a sense of community in here and talk about some non-Bitcoin things too. Just to warm things up or to close things down or whatever.
Okay.
So, anyways, I was gonna start. Let me get my list of questions up here. I forgot to bring that up. I was dealing with.
I got like
Yeah, I wonder if Mom thinks you're a real angel.
a demon, maybe. It's okay with me.
So I did want to kind of follow up. I'm going to do a podcast episode. I've started turning my videos that I do each week into a podcast. So I really liked Michael's question last week. I think it was Michael's question. Excuse me. That what if my wallet company goes out of business? What could
Yeah, that was a good question. I like that.
So I am going to follow that one up with a video on the podcast this week, and I'll have details for anyone who wants to get a link. I'm publishing the podcast on Spotify to begin with, but I'm also looking for other places to publish it that are going to be a little bit less decentralized, just make sure that people can get to it regardless. If I don't plan on saying anything inflammatory, but nowadays it seems like people are getting taken down.
You hardly say a thing without somebody getting insulted.
Yeah.
It's grievance central.
There's some interesting things happening, but one of my favorite podcasts to follow in regards to Bitcoin got taken down on YouTube, and really they are not like just everybody in the Bitcoin community was pretty surprised about it because they're very not political, they're not inflammatory. I mean, really they just talk Bitcoin. I mean, the worst thing that they probably do is they have episodes where they talk about price predictions, which, it's hard not to get caught up in price predictions, but I would say that I don't know that they're always helpful. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, and I don't think, even if they are mildly helpful, like for motivating people to invest, I know it's not accurate, like hardly ever, like 1 in 1,000. But I read something one time about they tracked I can't remember. I want to say it was financial advice, and they were tracking all their predictions, and their like success rate was like 10% or something crazy.
Yeah. But they're selling advice. They're not selling. That's their thing. They're not investing in it. They're selling it.
Yeah. That too. There is definitely that aspect where people are pumping something that they own. Right. Absolutely. That happens all the time. But I do think we want assurances and certainty. You know what I mean? We want to know what's going to happen so we can make the perfect plan. And it just doesn't do that,
that'd be nice.
you know. So, and I'm going to talk about stuff like that at First Step Bitcoin here. I have my ideas on what I think is going to happen, and probably most of it's going to be wrong, but I think enough of it's going to be right that people are that get started in Bitcoin and start using it as an investment, start progressing and investing other places too, are going to be much better off than people who are, you know, chasing the deal of the week, let's say. And I have friends that do that, that they're always like, what's the hot tip? Like, give me this. Like, oh, I invested in this last week in this. And they just, their level of success is so small. As a matter of fact, I've got this one friend, like him, great guy, good family. But if there's something he's investing in, I'm getting out of it. You know what I mean? Unless it's Bitcoin. I'm not getting out of Bitcoin, or index funds for that matter. But he's been in on so many. This is the thing. It's going to blow up in the next month or two. And it's been wrong like every single time.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, if he's saying get into it, I'm out. Anyways, and boy, have I given some bad recommendations on things over the year too. So I try to be very careful about giving out recommendations. So if Adam Z. Barth was on this call, he would tell a funny story about I was telling about some stock I found like 20 years ago, literally, and they had some technology that I thought was just fantastic. I'm like, Adam, this thing's gonna blow up, and and him and I
it blew up.
Money. It did. It blew up in the dumpster. It was so bad. So anyways, all right. So I will be posting a video on the podcast about what if my wallet company goes out of business or stops making updates, or I can't download it for a new device. So I'll be making an update on that, because that was a great question. Thank you, Michael. So today I'm going to talk about, you had a question, Dad, about is it possible to counterfeit Bitcoin and reduce the value of the Bitcoin we all own already? A very good question. So we're going to go over that, and we're going to go over places to keep your Bitcoin and when you should use them. What different places can you keep a Bitcoin? And, you know, keeping it on exchange, keeping it on like Cash App, keeping it on Venmo or something like that. And there's differences between exchanges too, but excuse me. And also, as a follow-up, because we talked about wallets last week, I wanted to talk about wallets really quick here and the different types. So we were talking about wallets, and I wanted to give a quick analogy that I think will help anybody who's not familiar with what a Bitcoin wallet is, because the name itself is a little bit misleading, right? It's not actually a wallet. When you set up an app on your phone as a Bitcoin wallet, it doesn't hold Bitcoin in it. All the Bitcoin that anybody owns, if they've really put money into it. And this is an important point too, and I'll talk about this when we get to like talking about Cash App and Venmo and making sure you actually own Bitcoin. But any Bitcoin you actually own, what you really own is the ability to control that Bitcoin, because all the Bitcoin is it's on the ledger, the blockchain, right? It's in the ledger. It's just a record of all the Bitcoin transactions, when the Bitcoin was created, when it was transferred to who, by who, how much, right? That record is really, there's no tangible Bitcoin. There is no Bitcoin that you even digitally hold. It's just you have access to control certain Bitcoin on the blockchain based on a private key, which is like a login. And the analogy that I like to use for this is like email. And I think I've told you this one before, Dad, but just for everybody else who will be listening to this, we have a private key for Bitcoin. We have a private key and a public key. Email works exactly the same way. Email has a public key and a private key, or you could think of it as a public address and a private address, right? So the public address when we're using email is our email address, right? You can give it out to whoever you want. Like I can say, you know, you can reach me at firststepbitcoin@gmail.com. I can give that to anyone. It's safe to give that to anyone. That's how people interact with you, right? Now, I don't want everybody being able to log into my email account and send email from my email account. I want only myself to be in charge of that and have that capability. And so my private key, as far as my private address or key as far as email is concerned, is my login, right? My username, my password. Maybe you have a two-factor or a multi-factor authentication, 2FA, MFA. If you've ever heard of that, that's usually you'll have a fob, or you'll have some digital app like Google Authenticator that produces a little 6-digit code that will be another form of authentication to go along with your username and with your password, right? Those are your private keys. Only you should have access to that. Bitcoin works the same way.
Use that on email, but I do have that authenticator for other things.
And so with Bitcoin, that's how the analogy relates to Bitcoin is your private key, your private address on Bitcoin is like your login, right? And it's in a different format than a username and password. You can have it that way with certain services or certain brokers where you may store some Bitcoin, but generally it's like a 256-bit key that is like extremely hard to crack. And so, but that key allows you to control Bitcoin on the blockchain that you have control over. Now, your email address, as far as Bitcoin concerned, right? That what compares to your email address in this analogy is your public key or your public address. This is something I could give you, and for each Bitcoin address, private address, you can create literally, well, maybe not literally, but seemingly infinite numbers of private addresses to hand out, right? There are people who they create a new private address for each transaction. That way they can track the transactions. But that public address, and you can hand that public address out to anyone you want to receive Bitcoin from. And all they can do is send to that address, just like email. All they can do is send to your email address. They don't have access to send your email, and they don't have access to send your Bitcoin without your private key. So that, getting back to the whole wallet thing, that's what a wallet is something like this. See if I can get it to focus on that. This is a hardware wallet.
Put it back further. There you go.
There you go. That's a hardware wallet right there. So that hardware wallet can be used to store my private key. And then when I want to send some Bitcoin to say you or anyone else, what my hardware wallet or my other wallets can do is they can authorize or give permission or allow a transaction to happen because you have that private key, right? So you may have an app on your phone for, say, like Blue Wallet, and Blue Wallet stores a copy of your private key, and that allows Blue Wallet to send your Bitcoin when you use the app to send it where you want your Bitcoin to go. And there's different places. They've had some updates to Bitcoin to make your private key or accessing your private key or putting it on a new device more human friendly. And so they've created what's called, it was an upgrade called BIP 39. And essentially what it allowed us people to do, users of Bitcoin, is to have a series of words or a recovery phrase of 12, 18, 24 words. You've seen this before.
Like when you set up that Blue
wallet. When you set up your wallet, you get a list of 12 words, 18 words, 24, depends on the wallet app. And that will allow you, it's a more human-friendly way to to put your private key on new wallets and stuff like that. So the different places you can have a wallet on your phone, right? And the phone could be used to authorize it. You could put your private key on your phone if you wanted to. Wouldn't recommend it because then if your phone gets hacked, you're in trouble. You can also, if you have like bought Bitcoin from an exchange like Coinbase or Swan Bitcoin, hopefully you've been buying it, or you'll start to buy it from Bitcoin only places. But if you leave it there on that exchange, they technically have the key, not you. Right. But that is another place you can store your key and your Bitcoin. But there's a saying in the Bitcoin community, not your keys and not your coins. So really, to have full control, you want to make sure you're in control of that key. So you'd want to put it on one of three things. Well, four things, actually. You could memorize it. There are people who've memorized it and literally have fled, bad situations in bad countries, with like people in Ukraine fleeing the war, people in other countries like Venezuela fleeing oppression. And so they've either memorized those 12, 18, or 24 words. They've written it down on a piece of paper, right? Another way to do it is you can put it on a metal wallet there, and you'll see some lines there where you can stamp in some words. Some of metal wallets have little tiles you can slide in. And then the other one that we already talked about is a hardware wallet. So that's something that four of those methods you can use to store that phrase of words that you can recreate your private key that gives you access to the Bitcoin that is controlled by that address within Bitcoin. So I just wanted to kind of go over that a little bit.
So when you put the money last week, when you put the Bitcoin into Blue Wallet, did they own the Bitcoin at that point?
No. So Blue Wallet gets the key, but the Bitcoin stay on the blockchain, right? They never leave the blockchain. It's
so
the
they're always
blockchain
in the vault.
they're always in the record, the
The
blockchain, the
ledger.
ledger, the record of of Bitcoin transactions. That's where Bitcoin stay. It's really just a record. It's a history of where the Bitcoin has gone and who has the ability to control it. Uh, Now, when you set up a blue wallet, what you're doing, there's not actually Bitcoin that go into that blue wallet. You're setting up the blue wallet, and you're putting either your recovery phrase into it, or you're starting a new one, and that gives you the authority, allows you or permits you to use the Bitcoin associated with that address, right? So like I said, the wallet name is a little misleading because nothing actually goes into it. It's like a it's like a key, like to
Right.
open the Bitcoin.
Safety deposit
Yeah,
boxes.
exactly. Right. And say, okay, send this to this person. I mean, everything that happens with Bitcoin happens digitally. They do have actually little devices that you can load small amounts of Bitcoin onto, and you can just trade the devices. So that would be like a physical, but really still, even in that case, what are you trading? Bitcoin? No, you're trading the right
The
to
ledger.
access that
Keys.
Bitcoin, the key, right? And so, yeah, people do that as well. There's some interesting little one. I think it's called like a Bitcoin dime or something like that. It has a set amount of Bitcoin on it, and you can pass it around as a physical thing, which in some places that might be really valuable to have that,
Yeah.
right? So,
So is the Bitcoin, when you pay for something or whatever with Bitcoin, are you paying in sats? I mean, Bitcoin this morning was trading for like
yeah,
$71,000 per Bitcoin.
yeah,
And so you want to get a loaf of bread and it's $4, then you're not going to give them 71,000. So if you
yeah.
paid for it in Bitcoin, you're paying them in sat.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're paying them in Sats and Bitcoin. It could, because you could.
Okay.
It's just a different way of looking at it. Like one Bitcoin is the same as 10 million Sats, right? You have one Bitcoin, and you have 10 million Sats. Actually, no. Is it a billion Sats? Let's see. One Bitcoin can be broken. Oh, it's 100 million. One Bitcoin can be broken into 100 million parts, right? And those individual parts are called sats. So currently the smallest possible unit, and this could change in the future depending on how much the value of Bitcoin goes up. But right now, the smallest unit of Bitcoin that Bitcoin is divisible into is 100 millionth of a Bitcoin. So one Bitcoin is the same as 100 million sats, right? And so you can make a transaction for 0.0009 Bitcoin, or it could be 300 or 3,390 sats. You can look at it both ways. It'd be similar to saying like, "Oh, hey, thanks for buying that coffee for me, Dad. I just sent you 537 pennies to pay for that."
Yeah.
You know what I
Okay.
mean? So
Right.
that's what it would be like, right?
You said maybe it could get to be a smaller unit.
I think so. I think as the value of, and I was talking about this in my podcast this morning. So Bitcoin is a deflationary money. So at least at this point in time, it is. Like anything, its value ebbs and flows, but consistently over time, you're able to buy more and more with less and less Bitcoin, right? So whereas with an inflationary currency like the United States dollar, over time, the same amount of dollars, the $100 buys you less and less, right? Like how many um, value meals could you get at your favorite fast food restaurant 5 years ago? Maybe 10 for $100. And now you're probably looking at like five or six, right?
Right.
Because and the crazier thing is that even over that same amount of time, because we're becoming more efficient, more effective at producing goods and services, the cost to actually make those meal, the real cost to make that food and that meal has gone down, right?
Mm.
But other things have gone up, like the value of the dollar, people's wages, those types of
Right.
things. So that is increased it. But with Bitcoin, you're seeing, like 10 years ago, people might spend 600 Bitcoin to buy a house, and now people are spending 6 Bitcoin to buy a house. Right. So
Yeah.
over time, it's becoming deflationary. And that's because there's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be created since we've created about 95% of it already, of that 21 million. And over the next 10 years, we're going to create another 4%. And then in the 100 years after about 2034 is the last 1% will be created over that time. The new supply of Bitcoin coming in, even though there's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be made, there is still a supply of Bitcoin coming in and being created every 10 minutes with every new block. But it's becoming smaller and smaller. And
It's like when we found the last deposit of gold on Earth.
right,
You've got finally the final amount of gold,
right.
and then that commodity is fixed at that.
Right. Well, and then
But
I've looked at gold before. I may be a little bit off, but I think it's usually about 1.5 to 2.5% new supply is created in gold every year. But what would happen to the price of gold if all of a sudden they started realizing deposits were mostly used up, and now we were only creating 0.5% new supply every year? That also would affect the supply
sure.
of gold, right? And it would affect the price accordingly. And that's what's happening with Bitcoin. Plus, more and more people, very few people are using Bitcoin, and we're going to get to a point where governments,
Well, that'd be huge. I mean, if the
markets,
next,
banks are going to be buying this. Businesses are going to be. So you're going to have not just 8 billion people using Bitcoin, but you're going to have countries, governments, banks, businesses, AIs will start using Bitcoin. So the demand is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow as the supply shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And so that is going to drive
it's,
the.
yeah,
It might get to,
whatever.
or it would be another decimal point. So
But
maybe
it's not like governments printing more money and
no,
making the money
no,
worth less and less and less. Smaller you can pay for
right.
something, but you got to
And
fix.
And we've actually seen this happen in human history as well. Like when the dollar was gold back, especially in the late 1800s, the prices of things we were in a deflationary economy, right? So prices of things were going down. Wages actually were going down over time because people were able to buy more with less. And because if the purchasing power is getting greater and greater, it's going to be, and the prices are going lower and lower, then people who are selling things, people are employing people, it's going to be harder for them to employ people at those higher wages. So they'll have to lower those wages. But for those people,
Somebody else will come and do the job for less.
if someone will come and do the job for less, or those people are going to be fine because now their money is going so much further,
Further.
right? And there's certain economic situations where that's not a good thing, and that's why you see resistance to these types of things. But overall, it's really good for the economy. It does force certain people and certain places in the economy. But I will say this too: one of the things that is overlooked a lot with how things work in our economy is with inflation, an inflationary economy, and that people don't really realize the people who get hurt the most in an inflationary economy with inflationary money are the poorest people amongst us,
Oh, yeah,
or
that's
people
always
on
true.
fixed incomes, right?
Right.
Because their income is not going to go up, but the prices due to inflation of the things that they buy are going to go up, and that's going to punish them. Whereas if they were in a deflationary situation, they would not feel those same pains. It is actually better
Right.
for the poorest among us and for those who are on fixed incomes to be in a deflationary economy than it is to be an inflationary one. Yeah.
Okay.
So you also asked, Dad, is it possible to
Counterfeiting.
counterfeit Bitcoin? And the answer is no. That is one of the genius things that or problems that were solved by the Bitcoin network, the Bitcoin system. Is it is a there's out there today, there's these things called full nodes. Full nodes are computers that are running on the Bitcoin network that are listening for new transactions, and they keep a full or partial. Most of the nodes are full nodes, and they keep a full record of all the transactions, all 840 some odd thousand transactions that have occurred now. They have a record of all of those. And these Bitcoin nodes, they have rules that they follow. And it is possible for someone to attempt to fake Bitcoin, but the rules system that has been set up inside the Bitcoin network makes it very easy for these nodes to detect false transactions. And in order for them to do so, there's a couple strategies. I'll talk about one of them, but all the regular nodes are going to look at that transaction and know it's false because it doesn't follow the rules. Because it's not just that transaction that's false, but it has to be based on multiple other transactions.
It would detect fake money faster than a clerk at 7-Eleven.
Yeah, totally. Yes, and much more effective than the maligned pins that they use that I guess aren't always so accurate at detecting whether it
Yes.
put that mark on it. I've just heard people
Yeah.
say those don't always work. So, anyways, yeah, the system's really good. Another situation would be where maybe someone has access to Bitcoin but tries to spend it in different places simultaneously, which
Right.
is just like it's not. I mean, we're talking about things that are broken into microseconds. So the Bitcoin network, somewhere one of those transactions is going to be received first,
Right.
and the first one to come through
Uh-huh.
and the first one to be put into a block is going to have it's going
The
to take
payment and the
yeah it's
other
going to
one's
take
going to get
precedence.
rejected.
Yes, exactly. So
Okay.
if you have let's say 1 million sats in a wallet and you go and you spend it 4 different times with 4 different people, one of those transactions is going to get approved and the other four or the other
Three.
three won't. Now you may not know which one's going to get approved. There is situations where maybe the first one that you sent out, or even if you sent them out simultaneously, one of them is going to get processed into a block before the others. And as soon as it one, because they get processed literally one transaction at a time into a block, and once it's been processed and it sees, oh, all the 1 million sats from this block have been spent, or from this address have been spent, the next time there's a transaction that comes through that tries to spend from that same address, it's going to get rejected because it won't have sufficient funds. And the Bitcoin system will know that. So it makes it very, very hard to break the system. There is one way you could do it, and it's not a hack for everything, but it would be an attempt to make some counterfeit Bitcoin, and that would be a 51% attack. So theoretically, if you have control of 51% of the network, of the Bitcoin network, you can spend a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of energy recreating past transactions and get to where you become the dominant Bitcoin ledger, or the ledger copy that or version that everybody accepts as the current one. But we are talking about trillions of dollars to do something like that. It's just so with Bitcoin, there's other cryptocurrencies that suffer from these types of attacks because their network is nowhere near strong. But there's really only two governments in the world today that could even have the resources to mount an attack like that, and it's US, the United States, and China. And China would have to spend all of its budget, and the United States would have to spend like 60% of its budget, and probably not just for 1 year. It may take multiple years, months, years to recreate and become the
To get it
dominant
set
ledger.
up.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so it's just unfeasible at this point. So really that's what makes Bitcoin. That's part of what makes Bitcoin the most powerful and the most secure, the safest
Boy,
network
this guy who
right now.
set this whole thing up was a genius then.
She, the group of them, whoever was Satoshi Nakamoto was a genius, I would say, or did
Well,
some
it wasn't
genius
an
things.
individual.
We don't know. That's the whole thing. He wrote the white paper. He started the network. He recruited other people to start working on it and making improvements and running the network, running nodes and miners. And then after
And
about a
started
year or so
offering
of
for sale.
participating, he disappeared.
Oh,
It, them disappeared, right? And is not there. We have a fairly good idea of what his addresses were because I think we talked about this last week. Bitcoin is not anonymous; it's pseudonymous. It has you can see all the addresses out there and what they contain, but you don't know who it belongs to, right? But we can see based on the blockchain, you can see from day one who was mining and receiving Bitcoin, and it was one person, one address. So we can
yeah.
safely assume that that was Satoshi Nakamoto,
Hmm.
he, she, it, them, their
Whatever.
address. And the interesting
Yeah.
thing is, it's the funds, the Bitcoin have never been used, never been moved. And so a lot of people think that once Satoshi set things up and got those addresses running to add a level of integrity that other cryptocurrencies don't have, because they do something called pre-mining where they award themselves for creating the network. They award themselves big blocks, big chunks of their cryptocurrency. And essentially, there's a lot of people that believe that he just threw away the keys, the private keys to those,
Mhm.
and just said, hey, this is going to prove that I did this for altruistic reasons
Altruistic.
and
Yeah.
not to make myself rich. But at some point in time, someone could start accessing those, and I don't think anybody at this point is going to view him terribly for him, he, she, it, them for using it because it's benefiting so many people at this
Yeah.
point in time.
And
Really.
really, if the United States does end up recognizing Bitcoin as an official digital currency, that seems to me like it would add a lot of legitimacy to the whole crypto concept and Bitcoin in particular and make it a lot more accepted worldwide. And, right now, China's trying to become the dominant world currency. And instead of the dollar, and maybe, well, I don't know, I guess crypto would end up, or Bitcoin would end up competing with the dollar and the yuan and whatever, currencies there are.
And it could, but they could also continue to coexist. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
At this point in time,
Yeah. I
there are
don't think
still
it would take
benefits
over.
to
Yeah.
the
For
to
any
using the
industry.
dollar over Bitcoin, right?
Right.
But there's some really positive things about Bitcoin in this regard too. If and for Bitcoin users. So if the United States did recognize Bitcoin as a currency, I think probably the best benefit that would accrue to people who hold Bitcoin is when you use dollars and then you spend them or you transact with them, you don't get taxed on any growth in the value or shrinkage in the value of those dollars. Whereas if you take some of your stocks that you've amassed over the last, over your working career and whatnot, and you cash them out and now they're worth 10, 20 times what they were when you bought them, say 40 years ago, you're going to get taxed on a capital gains tax, right? But if Bitcoin becomes in countries, places, wherever that Bitcoin becomes recognized as a currency, there won't be that capital gains tax. And that will be a huge benefit to people who use a Bitcoin. And as far as does that necessarily hurt the currency, like
Yeah.
dollars or yuan or whatever, it doesn't necessarily hurt them. In a way, I think Bitcoin makes them have to be better because at some point in time, people are going to say, wow, my dollars are losing value compared to Bitcoin. And, the Fed is going to look at this and go, oh, wow, everybody's dollars are losing value next to Bitcoin. Well, it can be a signal to them to change their policies to make the dollar a less inflationary asset, which also would be a benefit. So it doesn't have to take it over. There's people who definitely think Bitcoin will eventually take over all these things. I see also the opportunity that, again, going back to predictions at the beginning, I think there's lots of outcomes that we need to look at and be prepared for the different outcomes. And one of those outcomes could be that there will be some currencies that will improve their policies and kind of get the ship back in shape and be much less inflationary or not inflationary at all, and because they will feel like they need to compete with Bitcoin, right? So it'll be kind of like what we've seen here living in Arizona with charter schools. Charter schools in areas where you have successful charter schools that are doing well and educating students well. The public schools have tended to get better in those areas too. And so it's been a good thing. So we could see that is another possible outcome, I think, with Bitcoin is that we get into a position where people who want to maintain a national currency are going to have to be much uh,
Competitive with
more competitive. They're going to have to
other.
manage their money system better, right?
Yeah.
And that could be a great thing, honestly, for the United States if it goes that way. Because like right now, I think one of our biggest problems, I think the biggest problem, the biggest existential threat that people don't talk about, neither of the two major parties talks about this at all, but is how we are we are overspending I mean, we're pulling in like 3 trillion
Yeah.
a year, spending 5 trillion. My numbers may be off, but I think it's something like we're overspending what we're taking in by like 60% or something like
Right.
that. That creates inflation because now the
Oh,
Fed
it
has
sure
to
does.
go and create new money to pay for those, right? It has to create new
And
treasury bonds.
when you
It's not,
really,
yeah.
40,000 of the currently worthless dollars.
That
Not worthless.
the last thing that I viewed on that last numbers that I saw, like Bitcoin, like there's individual stocks who have outperformed inflation by significant margin. Bitcoin has outperformed inflation by a massive margin over the
Mhm.
last 20 years or 15 years since it's been in existence.
Right.
But gold is below inflation. It has not kept pace. It's right there. Gold is just right about
Oh,
there.
really?
Things like bonds have underperformed
Oh, bonds are
inflation.
terrible.
So if you're holding bonds, you're taking a beating because now your $10,000 that you put into bonds 15 years ago has like maybe like eight or nine thousand dollars
2,000.
worth of purchasing power,
Right.
right? So it hasn't kept. Whereas if you've done like an index fund, you're just a little bit above. I think it was like 2 to 3% above inflation. So if you put in, $10,000 into like an index fund in 2009, you have purchasing power that's probably worth 11
Right.
$12,000, right?
Right.
The real value has gone up and doubled multiple
Right.
times. Your real value is probably like 20 or $30,000, but the purchasing power in $2009 is still above what $10,000. So it is not a bad place to put it, but like you said, it really is kind of just it's kind of treading water and then
It
keeping its
is.
head above the surface, right?
Is there capital gains on Bitcoin then?
There is right now. Yes,
Yeah. Because I was
there
going to
is.
say, I bought like that Cash App. I bought $3,000 worth of Bitcoin. And then yesterday I was looking at it and it was worth about $3,800.
Nice.
So then, so then at the end of the year, I would pay capital gains tax on that $800. How
Only
would
if
I
you spend
know?
it. Only if you spend it. So and then that's part of what I'm teaching here at First Step Bitcoin is to look long term with this. You want to hold your Bitcoin for a long term so you can avoid things like having to pay capital gains tax. So just quickly, I was looking into this last year. I wrote a post on it somewhere, but if I understand and I did bounce this off a couple of accountants, but I think you get up to like $89,000 a year if you're married finally jointly of tax-free capital gains tax. And then after that, there's like it's graded on how much you take out. There's like a 10%, a 15, a 20%, something like that. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I know it's graded based on how much profit you take out. So if you put in $3,000 and you spend it before and you spend that 800, let's say, well, it's first in, first out. So if you took out 800, you wouldn't have to pay anything because that would be like taking out your initial capital. But let's say you spent all 3,800 of it before the year was out. If you do it in less than 1 year, it's not ruled as capital gains. It's ruled as income tax. It's part of your income. If you wait for at least a year from the time you bought it and then you cash it all out, now you are in the capital gain zone. And if you are married filing jointly, you have $89,000 profit before you're going to get taxed, right? And if I'm off on this and anybody's watching this and you want to update my numbers, please do so. I'm not an accountant, but these are the numbers I looked at last time. I was pulling data from IRS website, everything. So, and maybe I misunderstood that. So please feel free to correct me. But my understanding is if if you wait at least a year, then you cash out everything, your initial investment plus your gains. You'll be not be taxed on the first $90,000 of profit. You'll be taxed at a graded level after that, up to I can't remember what it is currently 25% or something like that. I think is the top capital
Well,
gains
if I
tax.
buy any additional Bitcoin and waited a year and I spent that $3,800, I'm
Yeah,
so far below the 89,000,
you're not going to
whatever.
pay it.
So then, okay, because I wondered, like on a savings account, I get a statement each year and it says you earned this much interest,
Right.
and then I got to pay income tax on that interest that I earned.
Yeah.
But with Bitcoin, I'm not going to get a statement from Cash App or whoever saying this is how much your
Right.
gains went up, this is how much tax you
Right.
will be.
Right. You won't. And hopefully it remains the way it is. There have been some talks. I don't think anybody's ever going to take it that seriously, but there's been talks about uh, taxing unrealized gains, right? And that means taxing gains that haven't been cashed out. I don't think that would happen, and I hope it doesn't. And I would make a big stink about it and try to get the word out. People view that as a way to tax the wealthy, but
Mhm.
the people who will get hurt the most by unrealized capital gains tax is the middle class, without
Yeah.
a doubt. It
Right.
will hurt them. And currently, capital gains hurt the middle class the most. People don't think about it. They think that, like, I hear all these commercials now that it's
Yeah.
election season, people coming after Trump because he's in favor of billionaires, which, first of all, I think is funny because all the politicians from both sides are in favor of billionaires. That's who they get the
Right.
most of their money from. But when you say like reducing capital gains tax is like a big benefit to billionaires, it's a bigger benefit to the middle class, especially
Yeah.
retired middle class. Someone in your
Right.
situation, Dad, you are the people who are taking out and paying capital gains taxes on your investments over the years at this point in your life. You are the ones who will pay the majority of those capital gains tax, and people just don't realize it. It's not high capital gains tax punishes the middle class more than anybody else. Unrealized capital gains tax would be devastating to the middle
Oh,
class because every year,
yeah.
every time it went up, you would have to pay a tax for something that you never got to benefit, and you would have less retirement funds. So
Right.
it is a terrible idea if you care about you know property rights, about fairness in money, and you're looking at who is really taking the beating for these kind of things and seeing that it's the middle class. Or with inflation, honestly, like we talked about earlier, the poorest people get hurt by inflation the most, the lowest socioeconomic um, groups, the people on fixed incomes. That's who inflation hurts the most by far and away. And so, and we don't talk about things in our political dialogues. It's really sad. There's just a lot talk about misinformation from all sides. This is the biggest misinformation out there, is these ideas that, if you give these tax breaks, it's helping out billionaires. And man, I don't care about billionaires making money. That's fine. I care about people we're going after the billionaires, but the middle class being the ones who pays the bill. That
Well,
I
it's
worry
like,
about.
yeah, it's like when, they raise the income tax in California. And Jerry Brown came out with this commercial and he said, we're going to increase the tax rate on millionaires. And then, right, he'd say, and everybody else in a lower, softer, quicker voice.
He
And
literally said, and everybody else.
literally said it in the commercial talking
Uh,
about it. Yeah, it was a voter thing. And yeah, we're going to raise the tax rate to 10.3% on millionaires and everybody else.
yeah,
But what happened was the millionaires had to pay 10.3%, and then other people ended up paying 9.3%. So being
yeah,
a millionaire, collecting all that extra money on millionaires is only 1% difference.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so, I mean, with our income level, we still ended up with 3%. We didn't end up at 10.3. So you
yeah,
didn't have to be
yeah,
wealthy. Just common people ended up
yeah. That's the thing, and that's where
much higher income tax.
yeah.
Yeah,
Ever since income tax was initiated in the United States, it was always billed as something that only the rich would pay. But
right.
from almost day one, it has been the middle class who have paid the lion's share of income tax.
This
So I,
whole thing that they had where they were talking about all these millionaire taxes and everything, but
hmm
then they're putting all this stuff into place to track if you receive as much as $600 a year in cash to a
yeah,
bank account. So they're
yeah,
$600. That's a pretty small
yeah,
transaction. You don't have to be a millionaire to spend or receive
right.
$600 in cash in your checking account. That's poor people they're going after. So
Yes, it
it's
is.
not even middle
It's
class. That's poor.
unfortunate. That is
Yeah.
poorer people for sure. So going back to that question, so it is not really possible to counterfeit Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It is a
That's good.
very good system. And you mentioned that he must have been a genius. I do think he, she, it, them was a genius. But also, there's a really good book out there. I'll have to put it in the show notes. I can't remember. It's kind of the history of Bitcoin before Bitcoin, because there was a lot of people that came out with digital currencies. There were several digital
Right.
currency experiments before Bitcoin, and Satoshi Nakamoto definitely learned lessons from those and
Mm.
solved problems that came to light because
They
people
had.
were iterating, right? They were creating, they were trying, they were discovering problems, they were discovering issues that had to be resolved for a digital currency system to work. So he really stood on the shoulders of some giants as well.
Right.
he, she, it, them, right? And it is, but it still is an ingenious system. And so there's one other thing I wanted to talk about too. Adam had a question in the community about, or he had a response to a question I asked about what wallet. He said he kept it on Venmo. And I just wanted to really quickly cover before we're done here, where you can keep Bitcoin and why you might want to keep Bitcoin in certain places. So you can keep Bitcoin on a place like wherever you buy it, right? An exchange, whether that exchange is Swan Bitcoin, whether it's a mobile service payment service app like Cash App or like Venmo, you can keep it on. Those would be hot wallets, online wallets, a centralized place. I like to think of a hot wallet as somewhere that it's a centralized place like a bank or a brokerage or an app where the downsides of keeping it there is now it's a target because people can hack into one of those places, and now they've got access to tons of accounts, thousands of accounts, right? Whereas it's way less effective to attack Bitcoin addresses one by one, right? The other downside of keeping it at a place like that is government confiscation, or in the case of what way I recommend people not use PayPal or Venmo. There's a couple reasons. And first and foremost, PayPal came out with a policy a few years ago that if you engaged in what they considered misinformation or hate speech, they would take $2,500 out of your account
2,500. Yeah.
or $2,500 out of any of your connected bank accounts. That's just ridiculous. I'm a huge supporter of free speech. And this idea that we can have a fair impartial person system that can just really determine what misinformation is, it's not possible, right? We just don't have enough information and enough understanding to know there's so many things that we think are misinformation or malinformation nowadays that in the future we're going to realize, oh, that was accurate, right?
True.
And
Yeah.
there's going to be so many things that we think are accurate now and justifiably so. We're going to look back and say, that wasn't accurate. We just, as human beings, even as groups of human beings, even as groups of human beings with AIs, we don't have that ability to see all ends and to see how things
Right.
will. And we've gotten so many, as human beings, we get a lot of things wrong, probably most things wrong, right?
And so keep enough Bitcoin in Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, whatever, if you're going to use it to pay for something, small purchases, but not enough that,
Yeah, you could do that.
yeah.
And the other place you can keep it too on there, because I do think you should keep a little bit. When you keep it at a place like that, any of those brokerages, Cash App, you don't really own the Bitcoin. You don't have control. You don't have the keys like we talked about earlier. But there could be some situations where it's hard to transact in the future for certain periods of time with Bitcoin from
Internet goes down.
right? Or, well, if the internet goes down, those things aren't going to work either. But I'm talking about government intervention. And we may not see this in Western countries like the United States, but we have seen this in other countries. And I think we will see it in other countries. So, and it's possible to see it here. I definitely think if people are buying a large amount of Bitcoin, they should keep some on brokerages, some in like Bitcoin ETFs, because then they will have, if the government for some reason ever came down hard on like actual Bitcoin transactions, you would still have access to the value saved in your Bitcoin that's held in like BitShares or some Bitcoin ETF or in one of these other places. You can convert it to cash relatively easily and still use it. But I also think that you need to have some that are in an actual wallet that only you control, that you hold the keys and you control those coins, because then as the Bitcoin economy matures and grows, you'll be able to transact outside of the dollar economy without having to always transfer money over. And if there's some sort of problem with the dollar economy, you can still be using the Bitcoin economy to make your transaction. So I think there's some benefits to both of these things. I don't love Venmo and PayPal for the reason that I mentioned about their censorship. I also don't like the fact that you can't transfer from Venmo or PayPal to an actual Bitcoin address. That makes me think that we don't have a guarantee that they've actually put that money into Bitcoin, right? Technically, they could just say, oh, you own this much Bitcoin, but they haven't necessarily bought and are holding in custody to back up your investment.
So Swan and Cash App actually buy the Bitcoin?
Yes, they do. And you can tell this because at any time, once you've bought it, you can transfer it off their network, off their system to
Yeah.
a real Bitcoin.
Or
So that's how you know. And I'm not saying that PayPal or Venmo are doing this or being fraudulent. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying we don't have any way to prove that they're not. That's what I'm
Okay.
saying. We can't transfer it off and know that, okay, yeah, that's real Bitcoin. I would,
Verify.
if you're telling me you want to save a little bit for expenses and stuff like you were just saying, I would say hold it in Cash App, right? The
Yeah.
other cool thing about Cash App too, well, Venmo works this way too, but Cash App you can get a debit card from them, or you can put it on your Galaxy Pay or your
Yeah.
Android
On your,
Pay and use it that way,
yeah.
right? Apple Pay, you can use it.
Yeah.
Your Cash App, I like Cash App is really cool too because a lot of point of sale systems that will have a QR code for Cash App at the bottom and in certain places I'll just scan that and I can pay for things from my Cash App account.
Mm.
So it's really nice. But yeah, so you can store it at these different places. I think there's reasons why you would want to store some on an exchange sometimes, maybe more particular on a Bitcoin ETF, just in case government for some reason comes down hard on the Bitcoin economy, on transfers between the dollar economy and the Bitcoin economy. You'll have the value of some of your Bitcoin in the dollar
But
economy
your
that
ETF is already,
exactly. Or
yeah.
you've got it on a Cash App, right? And you can transfer it there to dollars. And this is me looking at different problems. I think that these are possibilities, but I think there's low probabilities at this point that these
Right.
things will happen, right? But it also protects you when you have it in a wallet from government seizure or something like that, which does happen erroneously at times. There are people who
I
have
know.
been misidentified for committing some crime. It wasn't them,
The IRS
and the
seizes.
IRS or someone who seizes them. This doesn't happen very often. I'm not trying to say that this is huge,
No.
but it is a reality. It is a possibility, and I would like to be protected against that as much as possible. I would like to know that I would have resources if something like that happened to me that were outside of the traditional dollar system that had not been seized. So that's why I think
And
you need to have some in both Bitcoin in both places.
right. Now, the only other thing, like with Cash App, I think when you use Bitcoin to pay for something in dollars, they charge you a commission for,
Yes, they do. It's a very small fee. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's like 1.75% or something.
Was it even that high? I thought it was less than one.
Oh,
Like it
is
was
it
like
less than that? I'll
0.99% or
have to look.
something. I haven't checked it lately, so I don't know for sure. But I know that the transaction fees, because I used to when I ever needed to access some of my Bitcoin previously, I used to go through Coinbase, and their fees just started getting higher and higher and higher. It was like 4% to cash out, something ridiculous. And then
Yeah,
that's when I started using Cash App because it was like 1%. So I could pull out $1,000
I'll have to look.
out of
Maybe I'm
there and
wrong.
only
Maybe
pay
it
ten
wasn't
dollars in
that high.
fees.
Maybe that was, oh yeah, I think if you were buying under, that was a commission for buying. If you bought under 1,000, it was 1.75%. So it cost you 17.50 to buy $999.
And I think that's even gone down now too, to be honest. I think their Cash App is a very competitive price wise and fees wise. It's a very competitive place to buy Bitcoin. One right now, I think is the cheapest because they have 0% fees on for your first ten
First
thousand
10,000.
dollars of
But you can
Bitcoin,
only,
right?
I'd
And
rather
so
pay
for
the commission.
and for you, that's going to work good. I think there's other people that they don't want to go to the extent that you go to. Not that it's that complicated, but
Oh,
there's going to
it's
be
so simple.
people who just want it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
And if you're as simple as possible, then I think buying it at Swan for the cheapest possible and learning how to move it onto a wallet is good.
Yeah.
The other thing with Swan at this point in time, you can't cash out Bitcoin to dollars at Swan currently, but you
Yeah.
can with Cash App. Cash App, you can, pull some out to make a purchase or whatever, convert it back to dollars, which is
Yeah.
another good reason to use Cash App. So, anyways,
Okay.
well, hey, we are at an hour mark here, and I do have
Okay.
another appointment I need to get to. But thanks for showing up today, Dad. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for all the questions. I mean, we were kind
Yeah.
of covering a lot of ground there. I think it was good stuff to
Yeah.
learn. Would have taken me
Yeah.
a lot longer than an hour to learn as much as I just learned.
Good. I'm glad. And thank you to Michael again last week for some of his questions that we followed up on, and also Adam as well.
Yeah.
That was a couple of good points too that I'm sure other people are going to have questions about, as well as the stuff that you've been
Sure.
talking about, Dad. I think it's been really good.
Yeah.
Like these first 2 calls, I'm really happy with them because I think that this is gonna be really useful for people that are just getting started in Bitcoin and just getting started in investing and learning how to do it
Mhm.
through Bitcoin. I think these are
Yeah.
questions that are gonna come up for them, so these are it's great feedback, so thank you. Alright,
Well, we'll
see you
see you
this weekend.
tomorrow.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.